Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Chung. I'm the CEO for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. We're just going to wait about a minute for everybody to arrive and we'll get the webinar started. Thank you so much. Good morning again, everybody. I see folks are just joining. Welcome to the LADC Quarterly Economic Briefing. We'll be starting in about just 1 minute. We're just waiting for everybody to log on. And once we're logged on, we'll get started at about 11:02. Well, good morning. My name is Stephen Chung. I'm the CEO for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. Welcome to the LAEDC Quarterly Economic Briefing. We have done quite a lot since the last time we saw many of you at the March Economic Briefing, and before that, the February Economic Forecast, and the world has changed quite a lot since then. Today, what you're going to be hearing from is our Institute for Applied Economics, led by Shannon Sedgwick, who will be doing a number of different presentations with Justin Adams as well as Stan Wei, providing you with more context and more information about several of the reports and economic forecast information that you will need to know as we're moving forward in this upcoming quarter. Also want to give you a quick background in terms of how we've been and what we've been working on over the last few weeks and months since we last saw you. Since the last economic briefing and the forecast, LADC has hosted our 88 city summits, where we brought together cities from around the Los Angeles County region. We were hosting this summit for the first time in Torrance, and we're able to bring together government and business and nonprofit leaders combined together with our academic and philanthropic sectors to really talk about what we need to do for the next few months and next few years as the world continues to evolve. At the same time, we actually held our future forum looking at recovery, rebuilding, resilience, and the future of infrastructure. That conversation is in partnership with Cal State Los Angeles and also Cal State Dominguez Hills. And then we released a couple reports. We had a press briefing on the trade and logistics sector, sorry. And later on, you'll be hearing from our team here with more information about the importance and the impact of this entire industry sector to this entire region in light of the tariffs that's been really impacting not only the nation, but also the world. And finally, we had our Select LA Investment Summits, which is our international investment summit that LADC co-hosts with the World Trade Center Los Angeles, which is a subsidiary of LADC. And this was just earlier this month. And we were able to celebrate our 10th anniversary of the Select LA Investment Summit, where we brought together hundreds of international and domestic business leaders and government partners, so we can start looking at the future of international investment into this entire region. At the conference, we also launched a new report, our Foreign Direct Investment Report, where again, our team will be sharing some high-level data with you later in this session. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we will leave a portion of our time at the end of this session for Q&A. So please come up with your questions and start typing them in the Q&A function, and then we'll facilitate that dialogue and to be able to answer some of the questions you might have about the reports that we're presenting. At this point, I would like to introduce Shannon Sedgwick, our Senior Director for the Institute for Applied Economics, to present some information about the economic briefing for you. Shannon?
Hi, thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the LADC Institute for Applied Economics Quarterly Economic Briefing. As Stephen said, I'm Shannon Sedgwick, Senior Director of the Institute, and I'm grateful to have all of you with us today. Our team, including Dr. Justin Adams, Dr. Dan Way, and the rest of the IAE, is committed to providing timely research-backed insights that help inform economic planning, policy, and investment across our region. Whether you're tuning in from a government agency, a community college or four-year university, or the private sector, we hope today's briefing supports the important work you do. As always, our aim is to make sense of the trends shaping the national, state, and local economies, and to connect that analysis to the lived economic realities here in Los Angeles County. Can you go back a slide, please? There we go. We're covering quite a bit of ground today, including the current economic conditions at the national level, covering two of our recently released deep dive industry studies, Goods on the Move, Trade and Logistics in Southern California, and the 2025 report on oil and gas in California, the industry, its economic contribution, and major user industries. That's followed by the current local employment situation for the Los Angeles area and a brief look at foreign direct investment in California in 2025. So let's get started. Justin, the floor is yours. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Justin Adams. I'm senior economist at the Institute for Applied Economics, the National Economic Picture. So next. Let's start off with a quick note on tariffs. Tariffs are what's driving a lot of what's going on nationally. So that makes sense to start off talking about them.
Sorry, Justin, I'm going to jump in here for a second. Your sound is actually hopping off. If you can maybe get a bit closer to the mic or even dial in, that might be good. Thank you.
Okay, how is this?
Better. Thank you.
Better. Okay. I will yell at my laptop. Okay, so let's start off talking about tariffs. So 9 out of 10 economists view tariffs as being bad economic policy. And the 10th one was sick in this class during Econ 101 when tariffs were taught. Why are tariffs bad? Well, basically they make consumers worse off. So tariffs are not taxes that are imposed on foreign companies. They're actually they're imposed on domestic companies that import foreign goods. And then those companies can then pass that tax, some or all, on to consumers, which basically means consumers have to pay more for the same or more for less. Also, if an importer thinks that consumers won't be willing to pay that amount, then they can actually choose to not import these goods, and then you'll see empty shelves. So we've seen that the tariff policies have been fluctuating wildly over the past few weeks and months. Currently, what we have is a 10% baseline rate on all countries, with the exception of China. That's a bit of an exception. We have 0% for Canada and Mexico. They're a special case. There was a United States, Mexico, Canada agreement that covers many goods. Goods that fall under that have a 0% tariff rate. It's 10% for Canadian oil and gas, and then 25% for everything else. For China, we're back to about 30% from a high of 145, but this is paused until August 9th, and we'll figure out what the final rate will be after that. We're also seeing a 25% tariff on aluminum, steel, autos, and auto parts. Okay, next slide, please. So the tariffs have been sizable enough that they pushed businesses to stock up before the tariffs really kicked in. And this chart shows U.S. goods and services, the trade deficit basically from January 2020 to March of this year. And you can see a sharp jump in the trade deficit in the beginning of the year as imports surged. Next slide, please. So for current economic growth, uh, it turned negative in the first quarter. Although it should be noted that this number is preliminary and subject to revision. And the real question here is on business inventories and whether businesses simply imported a lot of goods early to stock up their shelves, or whether they pulled back on planned spending here at home to do so, and because they're being overly cautious for the future. It can take a little bit more time to get firm data on business investment. So we're going to know more in the coming months on the extent of the slowdown. So whether this downturn is, if that's the right number, and then whether it'll actually continue into subsequent quarters. Okay, next slide, please. So looking forward, the Federal Reserve is anticipating slower economic growth because of tariffs. And we've discussed in many prior webinars the fact that the inflation rate has not yet come down to a level that the Federal Reserve is comfortable with. And so this has caused the Fed to keep interest rates high to slow the economy. Now that we have tariffs and tariffs are inflationary, the Fed finds itself in a bit of a bind. So they're inclined to keep interest rates higher longer than they were intending, which means the brakes are going to be kept on the economy. So you can expect economic growth going forward to slow, which we see here a bit. They've placed their expectations for real GDP growth in 2025 to be 1.7% and then 1.8% next year, which is different than what they projected in December. And this slower economic growth is going to bump up unemployment as well. Okay, next slide, please. So economists argue that tariffs are inflationary. What do consumers think? Well, apparently they think the same thing. We can see their expectations of inflation. This is data from the University of Michigan. Their expectations of inflation in the following 12 months, which is the red line, and inflation, their expectations of inflation in the next 5 years, which is the green line. And you see the sharp jump in inflation expectations over the next year, going from 2.6% last November to 7.3% in this May. Even they expect higher inflation over the next 5 years, measuring about 4.6%. Next slide, please. And this inflation and the tariffs have really impacted consumer sentiment. And you see this, this chart shows, again, the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index going back to January of 2019. And you can see three large drops in consumer sentiment. One was COVID-19 back in 2020. One was COVID-19 and inflation, which was really focused in 2021 and 22. And now you're seeing another large drop due to tariffs. So the Consumer Sentiment Index was at a reading of 74 in December of 24. It's now dropped to 50.8 in May of this year. And you can see that that's actually quite similar to its low um, in June of 22. Next slide, please. So small businesses are, I will say, less pessimistic than consumers, but they are certainly dealing with the volatility of the tariff policy that has been rolled out. So, uh, according to the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index, um, small business optimism has fallen. It's fallen somewhat. It measures um, well, this shows the optimism index in blue and the uncertainty index in red. So optimism has fallen to 95.8 this April. That's below the 51-year average of 98. So it's a drop. It's not a huge drop, um, but you can tell that it is tied to the to increasing amounts of uncertainty that small businesses have regarding tariffs, and that's the red line. You see basically increasing volatility because of the tariff policies, and it's not so much because um, small businesses consume imports, but they use these imports as inputs in what they sell. And so the changing tariff policy, especially the tariffs on China, are really causing problems for future planning and just certainty about the future for small businesses. Okay, next slide, please. You're seeing similar volatility for larger businesses. This chart shows the S&P 500 weekly close for the last couple of years, and you see a steady kind of climb until about February when you start really hearing some of these tariff policies and the extent uh, the extent across countries and the levels of tariffs that you can expect. So in February, we were really hearing about tariffs on Mexico and Canada, our major trading partners, as well as China. And you see how the S&P 500 dropped um, really in April, right after Liberation Day, and it bounced back recently when we had a capitulation day on May 12th. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so tariffs are pretty timely for us because, well, we just released an important report. Um, we completed it in March. It was released in April. It's Goods on the Move, Trade and Logistics in Southern California, and it's really a deep dive in the trade and logistics industry cluster in the region, and trying to understand the importance and the impact that the sector has on the region and the nation. So next slide, please. So you can think of the trade and logistics industry cluster as really being the backbone for the Southern California economy. It's what enables the region to function, grow, and thrive. And really, it's the infrastructure that we have really enables that. So that includes the San Pedro Bay ports. Those are the ports of LA and Long Beach. Um, the region has extensive highway and rail networks, major air cargo hubs, as well as a vast warehousing and distribution system. And on the right, you can really see what's included in the industry cluster, the different types of industries that fall under it. So including wholesale trade, transportation, and warehouse and distribution. So we, IAE did this report. We were commissioned by the Southern California Leadership Council to conduct this in-depth study and help to really explore and quantify the the economic importance of this sector, especially in light of the global uncertainties that we've been seeing. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the region's major strengths? We have unmatched trade volume. The San Pedro Bay ports handled over 19 million TEUs in 22, with total cargo value surpassing 469 billion. We have extensive multimodal connectivity, a vast intermodal transportation network that moves trillions of dollars of goods annually. Job creation and economic impact. So the industry cluster directly employs over 900,000 workers, and it represents 13.1% of the regional GDP. And altogether, when you think about all of the ripple effects that come from the industry cluster, really it supports over 2 million jobs across Southern California. I should say we in this report we define Southern California as the five county um, the five county cluster of LA, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Ventura. The industry cluster also has competitive wages and workforce opportunities. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. And then investment and growth potential with over 6 billion in planned ports and logistics infrastructure investments. Okay, next slide, please. So more on the economic contribution of the trade and logistics industry cluster. As I mentioned, the cluster supports nearly 2 million jobs across the five county region. So it directly supports 900,000, but then the ripple effects lead to additional employment of 565,000 indirect, so those are through the supply chain, and 493,000 through induced jobs. So that's basically from household spending from increased income. The industry contributed nearly $500 billion, so half a trillion in total economic output, including 289.6 billion in direct output and 157 billion in labor income. Also importantly, the industry cluster generated 93.3 billion in tax revenues, which goes to fund all sorts of government services, both here locally and in Sacramento. Next slide, please. Okay, employment by industry. So the train logistics industry cluster employed 743,000. These are payroll workers. So the other 200,000 or 150,000 roughly are individual kind of contract workers, self-employed. But direct workers, 743,000. That covered about 10% of all private employment in 2022, which is an increase from 9.3% in 2002. Unsurprisingly, most of the payroll workers are located in LA County, but the next largest county was San Bernardino that had 21% of workers. You can see that most of these workers are in the wholesale trade segment, followed by warehousing and distribution, and then transportation. Okay, next slide, please. What's nice about the industry cluster is basically there are good paying jobs in it. So the average annual wage in the trade and logistics industry cluster was nearly 91,000 in 2022, and this was 26% higher than the average annual wage of 71,000 that was reported across all industries in the 5 counties. And really, this was driven by heavily influenced by 3 industries, given that there's so many workers in those 3 industries. So those are merchant wholesalers for durable goods, merchant wholesalers for non-durable goods, and warehousing and distribution. You can see at the bottom the real wage growth over the 20 years from 2002 to 2022. That Southern California trade and logistics, the real wages grew at 24%, slightly slower than for California and the US. Okay, next slide, please. So what are we seeing as far as workforce trends? Transportation and material moving occupations are the largest group. Warehousing and distribution employment grew incredibly, 345% from 2002 to 2023, with over 41,000 projected positions. Truck driving roles grew by 79%. Looking geographically, again, LA, just given its size, is the primary hub, but we've seen incredible growth in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. What's really important is we're anticipating 335,000 job openings over the next 5 years. And this is really driven by retirements and workforce replacements. Right now, we're not currently producing enough graduates to meet workforce demand, particularly in logistics, supply chain management, and truck driving. And so this is something that the region is really going to have to focus on to make sure that we have enough trained workers to continue this industry cluster and its growth, given the importance to the entire region. Next slide, please. So there are internal challenges, like we mentioned, with making sure we have enough workers. There are also external kind of challenges too, which is the trade and industry, the trade and logistics industry cluster. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates in a market. It's competing against other ports across the country that are all making their own investments in rail capacity and warehousing, like in New York and New Jersey, terminal expansions in Savannah, container terminals and cargo handling in Houston, and particularly deep water expansion in Charleston and Norfolk. And so basically, these other ports, they are competing for business. They're competing against us for business. And to some extent, they've been successful over the last few years. So you can see that between 2018 and 2023, total trade flows in Southern California declined by 5% as far as tonnage and 7.7% as far as value. And there were a couple of factors. So the pandemic disrupted supply chains, labor challenges, but also because they are making these investments that they make themselves more attractive And so that's another factor that we have to take into account. We have to continue to make the investments necessary to be able to compete and win whatever trade, however it's impacted by tariffs going forward. Next slide, please. So if you would like to read more, learn more about the sector, the report is available on our website, and the link is below, and that will be accessible. It's also accessible just from, you'll see it in the homepage, but you'll be able to get this link when these slides are sent out later. With that, I will hand it over to Dan to talk about oil and gas in California.
All right. Thank you, Justin. So good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Wei, the economist with LADC Institute for Applied Economics. So next, I'm going to briefly talk about another recently completed study by IAE. So this study focuses on the economic contribution of the oil and gas industry in California. So next slide, please. All right, so California's oil and gas industry continues to serve as a major economic engine in the state. So this industry supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, generates significant tax revenues, and provides stable, high-wage employment across diverse occupations. In 2022, the state ranked 7th in crude oil production nationally. However, in order to meet its demand, California now imports nearly 75% of its oil from out of state, and mostly through the San Pedro Bay port complex. And also, despite a long-term decline in the number of refineries in the state, which is largely driven by regulatory pressures, California still ranks third in refining capacity. Also, the state is a major energy consumer, particularly in its transportation sector. So in order to assess the evolving role of oil and gas industry in the state economy, LADC Institute for Applied Economics was commissioned by Western States Petroleum Association to conduct this study to examine economic contributions, workforce trends, and policy impacts across the oil and gas industry's 4 key industry segments: upstream, midstream, downstream, and market segment. So the chart on this slide also shows the definition of the oil and gas industry used in this study in terms of the 4 industry segments, as well as the further disaggregation of each of them into 3 to 4 subsectors. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So let's begin with the direct economic contribution of California's oil and gas industry. In 2022, the industry supported over 148,000 direct jobs. So these are positions that exist specifically because of the oil and gas activities, whether at gas stations, refineries, pipeline operations, or drilling sites. And these include both payroll employees and independent contractors. Most of these jobs, about 62% or over 92,000 jobs, are in the market segment, such as gas stations and fuel distribution. And then upstream and downstream segments each support around 23,000 jobs, making up approximately 15% each. And downstream refining makes up around 7%. So looking at this distribution, it highlights the industry's retail-facing workforce. And then geographically across the WISPA regions, we can see from the pie chart. So even though oil production activities are centered in Central Valley and Northern California regions, actually, Southern California region leads with nearly half of all industry employment, especially in the downstream and market segments. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now let's take a look at the total economic contribution of California's oil and gas industry in 2022. So the total impacts include not just the direct impacts we just saw on the previous slide, but also the broader ripple effects through the supply chain and household spending by workers because of the existence of the oil and gas industry. So altogether, the industry supported more than 536,000 jobs statewide. About 70% of this total came from indirect and induced impacts. These jobs helped generate nearly $338 billion in total economic output and over $53 billion in labor income. And in addition, the industry contributed more than $64 billion in tax revenues. So these tax revenues help support vital public services from infrastructure to education and healthcare across the state. So looking at the bar chart on the right, so each industry segment of the value chain plays a different role. So for example, the labor-intensive market segment, the red bars in the chart, which includes fuel, retail, and distribution, they accounts for more than half of jobs and labor income, but it contributes less to total output, again, because of the labor-intensive nature of this segment. And then downstream operations, the purple ones on the chart, such as refining. So they are small in terms of its contribution to employment, relatively speaking, when we look at their share of economic output. This is due to their capital-intensive nature. And then upstream activities, including extraction and drilling, represent a modest share of both jobs and output. Then finally, the midstream segment focused on transport and wholesaling. So this segment plays a very important connecting role in the supply chain. So the service of this segment contributes significantly to value added compared to its contribution to employment and labor income. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when we look at the distribution of economic activity across the WISPA subregions, Southern California region stands out as the largest contributor, accounting for about half of total employment and output contribution. The San Francisco Bay Area follows, contributing 18% of jobs and 28% of output. So this reflects the high value operations in this region. And then the San Joaquin Valley region, although it's small in scale, it still represents a very key player, especially in the upstream activity. So this region accounts for about 14% of jobs and 12% of output. And then finally, the Central Coast region and other regions in the state make up the rest with a combined 14% of jobs and about 10% of output. So the oil and gas industry's economic footprint reaches well beyond its own activities. Of the total 536,000 jobs supported by the oil and gas industry, over a third are in trade, transportation, and utilities, followed by professional and business services at 22%, and financial activities at about 10%. So nearly every sector of the economy, from construction to healthcare and hospitality, also benefit through the supply chain linkages and employee spending. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Let's take a look at the wages offered by the industry. So the oil and gas industry provides stable employment with strong wages, particularly for workers without advanced degrees. So jobs like gas and refinery operators offer median annual wages around $100,000. And also from the bar charts, we can see that across all education levels, oil and gas industry earnings exceed state average levels. So for example, high school graduates earn nearly 70% more. And those workers without a high school diploma earn over 50% more comparing to the average level for all industries at the same education level. So these wage premiums highlight the oil and gas industry's role in promoting economic mobility. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, so let's now turn to the composition of California's oil and gas workforce. So the industry is predominantly male, with about 68% in 2022. So this is much higher than the state average level. And over 2/3 of the workforce is between 25 and 54. So this reflects a strong presence in prime working years of the workforce in this industry. And the workforce is also diverse in race and ethnicity, although this is, it has a higher share of white workers compared to the other industries. And then educational backgrounds vary. But just as I mentioned briefly, while many roles do not require advanced degrees in this industry, the oil and gas industry continues to offer very strong wages at all education levels. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so looking ahead, California's oil and gas industry is projected to see a moderate job growth through 2027, with a net gain of about 4,000 payroll jobs. So this growth will be driven by the market and midstream segments, particularly gasoline stations and infrastructure-related jobs, as the capital projects resumes and infrastructure upgrades move forward. However, job losses are expected in upstream and downstream segments. So the upstream declines reflect reduced extraction and drilling activity in the state, while downstream faces ongoing regulatory pressures and shifting demand in transportation fuel. Over the past 30 years, California has seen a steady decline in the number of refineries. And the recent announcements to close 2 additional major facilities, one in Erie area and another near San Francisco, could cut the state's refining capacity by 20%. So these closures can result in job losses and also higher gasoline prices, greater dependence on imports, and added pressure on the goods movement sectors. So as the oil and gas industry in California transitions, embracing technology and regulatory modernization is very essential to sustain this very important industry in California and meet the state's energy needs. And also, it is very important to equip the workforce with skills for a changing energy future. So next slide. Okay, so here again is the link to the full report of this study on the LEDC website. So the report provides much more information on the contribution of this very important industry in California than what we can share in this brief presentation today. All right, so with that, I will hand it over to Shannon, who is going to talk about employment situations in Erie County.
Thank you, Dan. So switching topics, here in Los Angeles County, the labor market continues to show resilience. As of April 2025, total non-farm employment has surpassed our pre-pandemic levels by over 51,000 jobs. And the month-over-month and year-over-year job gains reflect this sustained recovery that's been taking place for several years now. Changing economic conditions related to policy shifts may affect this trend moving forward. Next slide, please. Employment in LA County reached 4.6 million in April. While monthly changes have been modest, within plus or minus 1% either direction, this consistency has been a strong signal of labor market stability. Next slide. LA County's unemployment rate fell to 5.1% in April. That's down from 5.5% the prior month. This puts us well below the 6% plus levels that we saw late 2024. The state rate has followed suit, following to 5.3, while the national unemployment rate dropped to 3.9. So these trends suggest, broadly tightening labor market, which again may change depending upon changing economic conditions related to the impact of policy shifts. Next slide. Looking at monthly industry changes, healthcare and social assistance stood out with over 21,000 new payroll jobs added, largely in social assistance. On the other hand, manufacturing and trade saw declines, highlighting ongoing structural pressures in these sectors. Next slide. Over the year, LA County added 8,300 jobs. That's a 0.2% increase. Healthcare demand was the primary driver, adding more than 43,000 jobs over the year. Local government also saw strong growth. However, manufacturing lost over 16,000 jobs, a reminder that some sectors continue to contract amid automation and global competition. Next slide. We're switching to foreign direct investment. This is foreign-owned enterprises. And one of the things that we look at is employment. So we're going to see how foreign-owned enterprises contribute to our employment situation. Our latest 2025 Foreign Direct Investment in California report, developed by the World Trade Center of Los Angeles, our institute, and LMU's Center for International Business Education, outlines a detailed picture of foreign investments' economic impact in California. Next slide. Foreign direct investment remains a cornerstone of California's economy. In 2025, FDI-supported employment increased to over 814,000 jobs, with the largest contributors being the United Kingdom, Japan, and France. FDI is concentrated in high-wage sectors like professional and business services, manufacturing, and wholesale trade, sectors that are critical to sustaining our regional competitiveness. Next slide. A key theme from this year's findings is that productivity, not affordability, is the stronger driver of economic growth. California remains 23% more productive than the U.S. average, thanks to our sectoral diversity and innovation ecosystems. And this economic diversity enhances our resilience, especially important as we prepare for long-term workforce transitions. Next slide. For the first time, we've introduced granular geographic breakdowns, not just by traditional metro areas, but by California Jobs First regions, LA County supervisorial districts, congressional districts, and LA City Council districts. So this means that local leaders and global investors have unprecedented insights into where FDI is landing and what it's supporting on the ground. Next slide. We also released Growing Closer, Ireland's investment in Los Angeles County, funded by the Consulate General of Ireland in Los Angeles and Enterprise Ireland, and officially launched on St. Patrick's Day at an event hosted by the Consulate General of Ireland. This country-specific study highlights the significant contributions of Irish foreign direct investment to our regional economy. 113 Irish-owned enterprises supported over 4,600 jobs and generated $540 million in labor income. The city of Los Angeles serves as the core hub, with emerging opportunities in creative tech, sustainability, and sports innovation. Ireland's role in our economy is growing and strategically aligned with LA's emerging strengths, including the creative industry, sustainability, and sports. And this report serves as a valuable tool for engaging Irish businesses, policymakers, and stakeholders in discussions about strengthening investment ties between Ireland and Los Angeles. Next slide. So the small team here at the Institute has produced a significant amount of work since the end of last year that we wanted to make you aware of, and this includes the Los Angeles County Update and the SCAG 2024 Economic Update, the Book of Green Jobs, a guide to middle skill climate ready jobs in Los Angeles County, which we developed with our community college partners at COE, a study on the economic impact of LA wildfires, and our 2025 LADC annual economic forecast, both of which we covered in our last quarterly briefing, and the reports we just shared with you today, a deep dive industry cluster report on trade and logistics in Southern California, another deep dive on the oil and gas industry in California, and foreign direct investment in the state of California with a snapshot of Irish FDI in Los Angeles County. As a nonprofit, all of our public reports are freely available on our website, and we encourage you to take a look at them if they align with any of your work and/or interests. Next slide. Thank you again for joining us. At the LADC Institute for Applied Economics, we remain committed to producing rigorous, relevant research that helps shape a more resilient, inclusive, and opportunity-rich regional economy. We'll now answer the questions you've submitted.
Thank you so much, Shannon, Justin, Dan, and Matthew for all those great reports. We will, in the remaining 9 minutes, answer some of the questions. I know that, Justin, you've already answered some on the chat function, but it might be good for us to actually answer it live as well, so folks that are in the audience get to hear some of the questions. But first, I just want to thank your team again for all those amazing reports. The first few questions that came in is, are the slide deck going to be available? Yes. The slide deck, just recording alongside with all the information that Shannon provided, will be available on our website, but specifically this briefing and the slide deck will be available later today, and definitely by tomorrow you'll be able to download the slide deck and the recording as well. So with that said, let's jump into the first question that Linda provided for us. When you say logistics, truck drivers, etc., 300,000 jobs becoming available, tech will be able to help with a lot of this. So how do we entice the youth, such as truck drivers, will be driverless, but how do we entice the youth that we see coming, and how companies will integrate? Are those retired out so there's long-term future in these jobs? So to summarize that, I think the question is, will automation, will technology transform those jobs that are available that we mentioned? Because per your report, there are over 335,000 jobs that will be available in the open over the next 5 years, because 93% of the cause of that is likely to doing a labor replacement as well as retirements. So with that said, with some of these transitions, how do you entice the next generation of youth or workers in general to be interested in this sector?
Well, so we can have a broader discussion on this. You know, as far as the report goes, we can only look out so far. So technology does matter, and we will see increasing automation, no doubt. So I can't really speak to 10 years, 15 years, like what the industry sector is going to look like. Certainly for our projections over the next 5 years, where we're talking about truck drivers and things like that, my take is that I'm somewhat skeptical on how much AI is really going to take over, particularly for truck drivers. So if you think about it, you know, it's one thing to see a Waymo kind of, you know, making its way down the streets of downtown LA. Can you imagine the 710 full of automated trucks? I think we're a long way off before we reach that point. And you can see that the regulators, particularly in California, they're proceeding very cautiously. Because, you know, just given the amounts of congestion that are in the area, you're very reluctant to want to just hand over, you know, vehicles that have tons of materials, and just to automation and hope that everything goes well. So you are seeing some automation rolling out as far as truck drivers, like in Texas. I think there are some and there are a few other pilot projects that I saw, like in Tennessee. But really, what you're seeing is very limited. They're like point-to-point routes, usually on frontage roads, something where um, there is just the repeatability where the trucks can the automation can get used to the route.
Just, I'm gonna jump in here because we only have a couple minutes left, but I want to
Sure,
make sure that we answered other
sure.
questions as well. So I think you answered the first part of the question, which is there might be some time that you need in order for you to build an entire automation system. You know, for example, you mentioned the 710. So in order for that to happen, you probably need permitting, you need a lot of regulation in order for that to happen. So it might not happen in a year immediately or two, but as we're looking in the future, there might be some transition there. So the second part of this question is basically, and I think there was a follow-up question from an anonymous that talked about let's see, how can cities better prepare the workforce to pivot to for more demand job, right? So this is about the next generation. I think one of the focus for LADC is to make sure that we get this information and data out there. If you look at the trade and logistics sector report that this team has created, they did capture that the average wage is $91,000. And so this is, I think you said 26% higher than the average wage for the 5-county region for all the jobs combined together. So given that understanding in terms of what that career pathway can look like, this is where we need to engage with public, private, nonprofit, academic, community, labor, environmental groups all together to come up with these strategies. Because if we're not ready and making sure that our next generation of workers, whether they're youth or displaced workers, then they're not going to be able to be trained to go to the sector. And that's why we encourage you to continue to work with LADC, utilizing some of this information and data that's provided by IAE to partner with our departmental team to really come up with these strategies to engage the next generation of workers to know that these opportunities are available to them, because a lot of folks don't actually see themselves in these sectors. Going back to the younger folks, sometimes we hear a lot of folks want to be TikTok influencers as their career choice, but when there are many other career choices that are available to them, and TikTok influencers, I don't know how many of them from a percentage perspective, maybe IE team, we should study this, how many of them were actually successful making a career out of being TikTok influencers. Again, not to put them to put that down, but just to make sure that there are options and pathways forward. So moving forward quickly, I think we have about 3 minutes left. I see that there was another question from Deborah asking, what do you see as the impact on our competition with other ports due to California's net zero energy regulation goals?
Well, I'll just comment quickly on what I said, which was essentially, so in our report, we actually identify a number of challenges that the trade and logistics industry cluster faces. The energy regulations were one of them. And here, you just want to ensure that you have low cost, reliable electricity to the ports. And if you don't have that, then that can cause problems and make other ports more attractive.
Got it. I think the last minute or so, there's a question that ties into it. We kind of answered it already. Do you think cities can help better prepare our workforce to pivot into more in-demand jobs? If so, what programs do you think would be beneficial?
Anyone? Dan? Shannon?
I guess I can jump in on this one. So if you're looking at what's happening in your individual city in terms of employment in your economic base, I think understanding the landscape of businesses, what industries they're in, and what their workforce needs are, is really the first step before you even look at programs. So when we're looking at assessing the needs of an area, that's where we begin. And in that way, we can identify the occupations within these industries, areas or industries where the cities are competitive in some way, and then go from there about identifying potential programs that can feed in to really understand the talent pipeline and what might be the opportunities to support the businesses that are there and help them grow.
Great, thank you. So making sure that we align the industries with the current pathways and working with the cities to create programs to make sure that they're able to train the next generation of workers into those industries. Great. Great. That takes us to 12 o'clock, and we're concluding this session. Rick, can you go to the next slide, please? I just want to remind everybody that there are upcoming events coming up. Please sign up for our June 11th Future Forum events. Our next quarterly economic briefing will be in August 18th. Please register on our website and save the date for our next 88 City Summit in October. All the information is available on our website, ladc.org. For the events, you can go to /events, or you can just basically download the reports that Shannon and the team has produced, and you can look at our research section and the report section. And then also this slide deck and this recording will be available later today. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next quarterly economic briefing. Have a great day.